Hello and welcome back to the OMG MotoGP podcast, and welcome back to XTRA, your extra dose of MotoGP, previewing the race weekend because we're back racing, only 3 more to go. First up, Malaysia, and don't forget you can get in touch in the meantime at OMG MotoGP on social media. Email us a question, omgmotogp@gmail.com. Like, subscribe, leave us a review. Thanks so much for all the love on the Colin Edwards show, by the way. That's doing amazing work at the moment, so keep watching it, keep sharing it as well. People are rediscovering us all the time, so spread the word. My name's Harry Benjamin, as always, former Grand Prix rider and British champion. Keith Hewen is alongside me, and we're in Malaysia, Keith, and Jorge Martin's got to win by at least 3 seconds.
Yeah, there's quite a lot to talk about, really, but we haven't got that much to talk about today, I suppose, really. It's a situation where we've got a wild card in there. Alvaro Bautista comes back to MotoGP. He goes good at Sepang. It'll be interesting to see what he can come up with there. You get Jorge Martin, as you mentioned, but he's had that tyre warning now, so the next thing will be a penalty situation. So he's had a tyre pressure warning. Anybody that's been following this podcast and following MotoGP quite closely will know what that could mean. And that could make a big difference as far as what happens after this. And, of course, we've got Yamaha that have only got 3 races to get a win in before they end up with the season from hell, which 20 years ago, 2003, I think it was the last time that they had a winless year. So we've got a situation where 3 topics there to be stuck into. Stats. It's funny, we have just the man to talk about stats with us at the moment. You'll see Dimitri Stathopoulos that's with us at the moment. Forgive me, Dimitri, if I say your surname differently every time I pronounce it, and I know you quite well now. But Dimitri, if I may say to everyone that's looking in, is Dr. Martin Rains on steroids plus. All those smart presenters and all those smart commentators that you hear and they come up with these astounding stats, they generally have come from someone. And Dimitri has been a driving force between accurate statistics that are so deep that, believe me, even the biggest spanner in the nerd world would have some struggle to get to the bottom. Dimitri, I salute you hugely and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a big build-up.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how this started. I mean, from my position, obviously as a commentator, me and you met for a coffee one day at Silverstone in the lovely coffee shop there, and sort of batted around a few bits and pieces. But it was clear we intended meeting for about 5 minutes. I think we sat there for about an hour and a half talking about things like stats and where they come from and how accurate they are and how difficult they are to collate, and from a commentator's point of view, to use in our case. But I mean, what gave you the first point? Where did this come from? What is your background regarding this?
Yeah, so I'm a data analyst and application developer for data analytics for multinationals. But that's dull. I'm actually a huge MotoGP fan, okay? And so 10 months before we met, which I think was around January 2020, Keith, I was watching you on BT Sport, and I think somebody raised the question, how many times has Rossi gone straight to Q2 this year? And how many times has he got stuck in Q1 or had to go via Q1 to Q2? And I remember it clearly. You said, hang on a minute, let me look at my bits of paper, give me 2 minutes. And it did take 2 minutes. I sat there, I did look at my watch, and it took 2 minutes. And I remember thinking, no, surely that information must be available. What I didn't know at the time was, of course, you have a team behind you. I had visions of you actually looking through bits of paper, but of course there is a team. And so I was watching with my son Greg and my daughter Yana, who are very much involved in this project with me. And I just thought, well, I'm going to build an app. A MotoGP analytics app for data analysis. And it was profoundly naive because I didn't know anybody at all in MotoGP, So we spent the next 8 months collecting facts, and information. And then once we had a workable version, I then realized, well, I've got to show this to somebody. And I started sending emails and nobody replied. I couldn't open any door. It was, and I remember thinking, okay, well, that's not going to work. But then I remembered fortuitously I'd been to a barbecue 2-3 years before, and I met a chap there that used to race motorcycles. In fact, he'd actually raced quite well, and he shared the grid with Jorge Lorenzo at some point in 250s. So, we're talking about a bit more than just club racing. A chap called Ian Gardner. And I sent him an email just saying, Ian, do you by any chance happen to know anybody at all from the BT team? Because I'd really like to, get to know one of them at least. And he said, well, actually, I do know Michael Laverty. So he introduced me to Michael, and Michael had a look at this via a net meeting. And then, if you remember, he introduced me to you, Keith, and we met that day, as you say, in the coffee shop in Silverstone.
The incredible thing about it is our sport really didn't develop until the likes of Dr. Martin Rains and your good self have got behind it. Because back in the day, if I look back through some of my early Grand Prix appearances, if you like, from practice and qualifying, there's no records. There are no records out there. So how did you manage to collate this kind of information, to get it as in depth as you have done?
Well, just fortunately we have the internet now, so and there's loads of different places that will have the information. But because I'm sort of have an advanced state of paranoia when it comes to trusting data, I have to validate it, And so in many cases, if I had even a slight bit of doubt about the data, I would find a YouTube video of the race and sit down with my pen and paper and make a note of where everybody finished to make sure it was absolutely correct. It was a massive...
Old school.
Yeah, old school. It was a massive operation, And then I remember one thing that came out of our meeting, Keith, was so if a rider's injured, they're not going to be in the data. Right, and the problem is with data is that you can't look for something that's not there. So I remember you said to me, well, the thing is, I don't remember why so-and-so is missing from 2012, and you're creating work for me by making me go and look for it if I need that piece of information. So I remember thinking, yes, okay, we need an injuries database, so or a why are they missing database, which invariably is linked to injury. And so that was another, I don't know, was it 6 months? I can't remember of going back to 2000, right? Because when I built the app, it was 2019. We started the work, and it was important that it covered all the riders on the grid at the time, because there's no point having incomplete data. And Valentino started in 2000, so we had to make sure we covered everybody, and so whenever you make any change like that, it's quite a big operation because there's 20-something years worth of data.
So every time we come up with something as commentators and you're listening, and it sends you in a spiraling manic panic to go and find exactly what that might be. I mean, Marc Marquez, I think we were suggesting on this podcast recently that Marc Marquez, what was the situation for him and comparing him with riders of a certain age. And you've done all of that, haven't you? You've worked that out already.
I did it recently, actually. Yeah. Because one of the things I remember that was important is, in GP, everybody likes to say that a rider is so many years and so many days old. So we have to have all that information in the app. And then it occurred to me, because of all the talk, of Mark will be 31 years old when he jumps on the Gresini for the first time, right? And so therefore, everybody has an opinion about how they think he'll go. But but for me, the question was, we don't know how he's going to go, but how has everybody else done, right? That has raced at that age and has been a winner, okay? And so, we looked into how many GPs as a rider won when they were 25, when they were 26, when they were 27, when they were 28. And if you were to ask me, and this is what I do like about this and my involvement with MotoGP, because, it is fundamentally interesting if you like MotoGP. You would think that a rider, as they learn the trade, well, when they get into the Premier class anyway, there'll be a curve that they rise up to what would be a peak. And then you would expect them to slowly tail off, right? But actually, no. It drops abruptly at age 27. There's a caveat here. I should say I've been looking at riders that started racing from the year 2000 onwards in MotoGP and are over 30. Because there's no point looking at the younger guys because they haven't finished yet. So we don't know when they'll pick. So we're looking at people that are, whether they're retired or not. Anybody that started 2000 onwards and is over 30. And there's a big drop at 27. And then again at 32, 33. It's like a step, 2 steps, rather than a curve, okay? And so you start thinking, well, okay, now that is interesting. I wasn't sure I expected that, Although that said, I have met with a rider analyst for one of the teams whose job is exactly this, and he comes from a racing family, and he told me when we looked at that together, he said, now my dad had always told me that 27 would be the age that the performance would drop. And I was like, well, I mean, that's quite remarkable, actually, because, he's right on the money. Now, looking at it with my daughter, who really helps me with all of this analysis, she actually said, the thing is, the data is quite skewed by Marc Marquez and Casey Stoner, because they both were big winners in this era, massive winners, okay? And Mark injured himself, I think, when he was late 26, or just turned 27. And Casey gave up when he just turned 27. So if you remove those riders, you then have a situation where there are steps again, but they're less pronounced. Steps, though, it's not quite smooth, But so the question is, should we or shouldn't we include them? Right, and there's a debate in itself. I personally think you should include them because something happened that prevented them from winning in their 27th year. In Casey's case, it was the loss of love for the sport, I guess, motivation, the desire, and in Mark's case, it was the accident in their act. So there was a definitive reason in both cases why they stopped.
I'm looking at the face on Harry, Dimitri, because, Harry works as a commentator, Formula One and some of the car sports as well. I mean, I dare say we're going to get him in bikes at some stage, at not too distant future. And he's really the age that can appreciate the kind of work that you do, probably more than the old fella like me. It goes around in my head and I've forgotten it by the time it comes back to the front nowadays, which is a bit of a shame, but there you go. That's life. The likes of Michael Laverty, you mentioned him earlier on, he would be the kind of guy that would really appreciate what you do. Sylvain Guintoli as well, if we're talking about the TNT team, he's another one, an up-to-date guy. Because he has that analytical mind, because he's a test rider, up until recently with Suzuki, he's still a current rider, of course. That kind of data, they can, work that out. It's a logical thing for them to work out. For old school, it's a difficult thing to manage that kind of overload So your presentation to television teams, do you find that it's really the younger ones that are coming through that are absorbing this stuff better than maybe some of the older commentators, the older guys that are behind the counter? Or is everybody sort of taking it on or taking portions of it perhaps to use in their programming? Maybe you need to do a stat for this.
Yeah, that's right. I'll get back to you on that one. Honestly, I don't know. I think it rather than it being an age thing, it's more a question of people realizing that what we're sending out. So for each race, we send out basically a batch of information about that track, the current state of the championship, how many times has a rider gone through to Q2, blah, 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 all of that stuff, right? But at the same time, we do a deep data dive as well. And it's taken time to build a little momentum for people to realize that the deep data dive can be very interesting. In fact, for this race that's just coming up now, I got messages from various TV stations going, ooh, this one's a good one. Yeah, we like that. Thanks very much. So actually, it's momentum is building. But I couldn't really answer you actually whether it's younger or older. I think to be honest, everybody wants to have an interesting angle, right? So you start with a simple idea like the one we had before. Well, how's everybody else done if Mark's going to race at 31? Another really good one was earlier this season, the sprint race introduction. It's going to be flat out. There's going to be no tire conservation. It's going to be go from work go. So I found myself thinking. So the average lap time, how much quicker is it in the sprint race than in the main race? Okay, I'd like to have an understanding. 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, what? And after Le Mans, 5 rounds in, we have usable data from 4 rounds really because Termas was wet dry in the 2 races. To my astonishment, I found that the average lap time was quicker in the main race than in the sprint race. And so what happens is you start with a simple idea. What's the average lap time? Then you have to dive into, I wouldn't say a world of pain, right, but a lot of work, to find out what the answer is. But the answer is actually quite simple to digest, and it's kind of that is what we're doing.
I feel like you and Pete McLaren would get on very, very well.
I've met Pete. Yeah.
I get that sense. I'm not surprised. I mean,
sorry, Harry, go on.
Go on, Keith.
Is this going to be available to other people? I mean, at the end of the day, you're obviously doing a tremendous amount of work for the behind the scenes, for the television companies, for the radio commentators, and so on and so forth. But is there sort of a website anywhere or anything that you're going to be developing for later on? So, our fans, people that are more general, can access some of the stats, the headline stats, if you like. Perhaps not, maybe even the deep stuff. I don't know. It depends on what you're prepared to let out there into the public domain. I mean, is there a place where any of our fans can go?
At the moment, no, because the way I conceived this originally is that I'm going to provide the expert commentators with the information for them to relay it, because everybody knows a Keith Ewan, everybody knows a Gavin Emmett, a Susie Perry, but no one knows me, and so that, and I'm also not interested in being the front man, frankly. I'm just more interested in engaging with experts in the field on MotoGP about stuff that they may not have known themselves. It's quite interesting in that having had conversations with certain riders through other people and once or twice directly, you come up. I mean, the very last round last year, Valencia, I was walking along on Thursday just outside the paddock, and then bang, this Bastianini right in front of me. And I said, "Oh, we're there." People don't know me from Adam, right? I mean, I've been a little bit more in more races this year, but I'm not a known quantity really, other than those that I'm working with. And I said, "Let me just, can I?" He goes, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Did you know that in terms of overtaking places gained from lap 2 to the end of the race, you're the strongest performer in the last 20 years for anybody that qualified on average in the top 10, right?"
I bet he liked you after that.
He was like, he went in his face, right? He was like, "No, what, really?" And I said, yes, and I said, for anybody that's qualified on average in the top 10, in fact, only one person had ever done better. That was Vinales in 2018, but he was losing a tragic number of places on lap 1, and so he was then spending this time making up for them. Whereas Bastianini had a bit of an Achilles heel on lap 1, but and he didn't know that. His PR guy was there as well, and his PR guy was saying, "What, really? Really? What? And I was like, yes, and it's sort of interesting to me that the very guy that's doing the overtaking doesn't know it, so it's just interesting.
In F1, we have very much the equivalent to you, but one of the great things we have, which is the guy called Sean Kelly provides almost like a live stat on the screen as the race is unfolding. Right. So if something is happening, if Alonso gets this podium, it will be his number 100 and whatever it will be. Or so as a commentator, those things can be life-saving, because when you're in the thick of the moment, sometimes you need to glance and just go, "Oh, okay, great, yes. I'll add that in at some point just to give it a bit of flavour." But obviously this weekend, you compile your stats ahead of the Grand Prix. What are the big stats ahead of this weekend?
To be honest with you, I mean, I think it's not really so much of a stat situation. I think it's something that we all really understand. There's two guys going for it. They both have different strengths and weaknesses, but also the same weaknesses, right? In that, I think we've all seen that Martin, I mean, interestingly, up until Misano, Martin, who's a one-lap specialist, hadn't had a pole position until Misano this year. He'd only actually had 2 front row starts, and so something happened from Misano onwards that's got his one lap pace sorted, which has then enabled him to just do better in the races, right? And I think we all know his turn of speed at the moment. We'd all agree he's the fastest. On the other hand, though, Bagnaia has more experience fighting in this way. He certainly has a big turn of speed to it, maybe not quite the outright pace of Martin at the moment, but they're both capable of making unforced errors. which is interesting. So you don't know what's going to happen there. But strategically, what he lacks in that absolute last portion of speed, Bagnaia, he makes up for with more strategic thinking, possibly, right? So for me, it's not a stat thing.
Well, it's going to be one of those weekends where, with the weather forecast again that we're looking at, the weather forecast might well make a difference to anybody's strategy regarding that in Sepang. I see that, like the Thai round, which was supposed to be rainy on Saturday and Sunday, we've got the same kind of forecast coming up this weekend as well. And with only 3 rounds left, I can't believe we've only got 3 rounds left to go, because it seems like a long season, but it's going to be tricky. There's no doubt about it in my mind. And it's who managed it. And I think you're right, Dimitri, when you say about Bagnaia has got the experience to maybe just, keep that calm in there. But it's the spoilers, isn't it? And that's where your stats, again, the deep diving into stats, it's the spoilers that could make such a major difference to where this is all going to end up. It's not about just 2 men. Everybody's so close. Statistically, it can swap around really, really quickly.
That's right. And we've seen that happen already, haven't we? In the last couple of races,
We have. One of the things that strikes me slightly strange is that your work is so incredibly deep. I keep saying this because I've obviously looked at it, and I mean, it's just what Harry said a minute ago up on the screen. If it came up on the screen, that would help me tremendously. But we never had anybody behind us at the time that was able to look at your stuff and relay that to me in any kind of way that I could use it. And I didn't dare take my eyes off the screen because there was always so much going on as far as motorbikes are concerned. You can't take your eyes off the screen to look at a piece of paper to work it out. So that was the difficulty I had back in those days. But I was always very surprised that people like, we'll say, BT back in the day, because TNT is a slightly different enterprise now, that they didn't use it in their digital platforms. I mean, for instance, like this is our commentary, this is our live stuff. But if you want to take a look on our digital bloody platform, you can find the stats. You can look into them yourself. Because I know there's thousands of people out there that love this kind of stuff, that love churning it over and looking into it, which surprises me. I mean, Dorna used to rely on Dr. Martin Rains to give us a sheet. We had a commentator's sheet of a very, very brief MotoGP, Moto2, Moto3 stats. And then, of course, when for some unknown reason they sort of let Dr. Martin Rains go, and it was done in-house, and then we were having to double-check every stat, because like you're paranoid about, so am I, about repeating something that's false information. And 9 times out of 10, it was wrong. You could find holes in their stats, which is a nightmare from a commentary point of view, or even from
you've got to trust your Statman.
When the fans get onto you
and there you go now, Dimitri. You say you're getting more well known in the paddock. Well, now everyone can see you on the OMG MotoGP podcast. So
that'll probably be the end of it then. Yeah.
Well, I hope not, because I love a bloody good stat. There's no doubt about it.
We'll have to get you back on, Dimitri, for more stats peppered throughout next season, perhaps when because there are only a few races left. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Dimitri, to get to know you. It's not enough time, but we are running out of time, I'm afraid. So we're going to have to call it there. But you can make sure you subscribe and all that jazz, OMG MotoGP. Send us an email. Do you want stats? Do you want to access stats? Let us know. omgmotogp@gmail.com. And we'll feed that back to Dimitri. But for the time being, my thanks to Dimitri, to Keith, and we shall see you straight after this weekend to look back at it all. Bye-bye.